The other thing that I see happening at the moment that really concerns me in early childhood education is a very political shift towards what matters, and what matters are things like, what seems to me, literacy and numeracy. And so much time and effort and training is all about literacy and numeracy. And I think if we use the Belonging, Being and Becoming document, it says we need to think about early childhood education in a really holistic sort of way and draw on different theories. And I think if we prioritise literacy and numeracy above things such as play, identity development, attitudes, things like that, I think we go down a really dangerous path of not providing children with their right to a really full, holistic education. And that concerns me at the moment, that those sort of things are being prioritised over what I believe to be even more important things. It's not to say that I don't think we should do it. It's or be accountable for it, but there are a whole lot of other things that we need to be really focused on and doing in a really holistic manner.
We talk about Indigenous literacies when we look at things like spinner yarn. So it's a way of encouraging our children and all children to storytell and to learn how to read the symbols and put them together in a story.
Yeah, that's right. And I know with the children up at school, when they were working on, their designs, they were actually documenting, what I had shared with them, what I'm passing on, the knowledge that's been passed on to me by elders like Uncle Larry Walsh, and so those children are involved in that. It's not just a piece of artwork. It is actually history. And it connects those children as well to this local area.
One of the stories I like to tell to help people understand what it means to have an embodied practice, or a practice that's in some sort of tangible form, because that's a really hard idea, is going hunting with some women in the desert, driving around in a troop carrier with some women and looking in the bush for some form of bush tucker. Now, as a person who is not a participant in that community, I find it really hard to see anything in the bush. We're traveling along and there's lots of trees, and the trees look exactly the same to me. There's no difference. And suddenly we're at the place where the honey ants can be found. So we stop, everyone gets out, and we begin to dig for honey ants. And lo and behold, 6 feet, sometimes below the earth, are these beautiful little gem-like honey ants with big bulbous backsides and full of a sweet honey flavor. And I remember sitting on the edge of this pit watching an older woman, a much older woman than I was at the time, with a crowbar, digging away. And I didn't know at that time that I was really irritating her, because I was letting little stones tumble down because of my interest in what she was doing. I was leaning over in other words, I was doing a whole bunch of practices that were really very irritating and ignorant. I was ignorant of the practices that count. I did wander away and come back and wander away. When the honey ants came out, the older lady was giving them to the young children, but not all of the young children. Some of the young children didn't even go near the pit. And I'm talking about children who were about 18 months to 2.5 years old. They were very young. Some were clamoring around to get some honey ants and some weren't. And I remember asking my mentor, my Indigenous mentor, what's going on there? How come all the kids aren't clamoring to get the honey ants? And she said, well, those are her grandchildren. As if I would understand what that meant. That of course her grandchildren would get those honey ants first, and then the other children would. But what I noticed in myself is that I was clamoring around too. I was waiting for my honey ant. And I guess in my community of practice, the culture I'd come from, the way I'd been brought up and understood the world, I would get a share. But there was absolutely no expectation that because I was an adult that had come along for the ride, that I had any entitlement to those honey ants, which is fair enough. But I think I was telling this story about how the space and the place and the objects have meaning. And that's really the main point of this story. They had no meaning for me. So this whole notion of meaning making is in practice. It's in doing. Now, I have a much better repertoire now of understanding what the bush means and how to engage in the bush, let's say, than I did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because I've participated in a few little practices, and I would call them practices on the edge of the communities that I've worked with. But I've learned how to see what I couldn't even see and hear what I couldn't hear before that. And that's not a unique thing to Aboriginal culture. Anyone who's spent a lot of time in the bush is going to learn those practices that mean that tree is a tree where you're going to find honey, and that tree has the roots where the witchetty grub live. And you learn to recognize that in the same way you recognize what a good coffee shop is. Because you've participated in the practices that count in the communities that you're a part of.
Putting sociocultural theory into practice means that we have very strong partnerships with children and families, so that we're talking to families all the time, exchanging information with families about the sorts of experiences that children have at home, the sorts of literacy experiences they might be having, the sorts of texts that they're engaging with, and trying to bring those texts and those experiences into the setting as a starting point for children's literacy that we can build on. It means talking to children as well about what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, what they would like to engage in the centre curriculum, so that curriculum becomes something that's negotiated with and across children, families and educators, so it's very flexible and responsive to children's interests. And rather than banning particular artefacts or not being comfortable with particular types of experiences, I've found that it's much more productive to actually bring those experiences and those artefacts into the setting and to work with them. So, for example, a setting that was not comfortable with using popular culture because of concerns about consumerism and gender stereotypes and violence, found that even though they banned popular culture, the children smuggled it in their backpacks and under their hats and in their pockets, and there was a whole lot of black market economy going on in the back of the playground and the locker room. And when we actually said to children that it was okay to, bring their Pokemon cards and their Pokemon books and their Little Mermaid toys to the centre, and that we were actually going to talk about those, many children who weren't really engaged with literacy at all previously and would do lots of running around being Batman and Superman and causing lots of concerns for staff, became very actively engaged and interested in literacy when we brought in popular culture. So they wanted to talk about, to draw and to create models of their favourite characters and narratives. They would retell stories, they would draw the stories, and there was lots of literacy learning going on that was tapping into their interest. And it also enabled us to talk about some of the issues with children and to engage parents in some of those discussions as well about how we use popular culture to engage children in critical literacy and to talk about issues of consumerism and gender roles and so on.
My choice of theorists, it's very hard to pin down one or two, but I want to name a few that are Vygotskian and a few beyond that. Obviously Vygotsky himself, and also Thorpe and Gallimore and Karpov, who have been neo-Vygotskians. I have found their work very useful indeed. Other people that have informed me have been Gareth Matthews' work on philosophy with children, Kieran Egan's, particularly when he talks about getting it wrong from the beginning, in early childhood, and his whole concept of teachers as storytellers. I like that very much from Egan's work. But probably someone who has sustained me right from the beginning when I was in initial teacher education myself is Margaret Donaldson's little book on children's minds, 1978, I think. But I think it still stays the test of time in the questions that she asked there and the things that they put. Now, why these people, or what is it that makes them in particular? There's a number of things. There's the whole idea of making meaning. Now, I didn't mention Deleuze and Guattari, and I probably should have, because in my work in doing philosophy with Vygotsky and with children, Deleuze and Guattari's book on what is philosophy I found very, very useful. And in it, they make the point that reflection itself is not enough. There has to be making meaning. There has to be new concepts formed. And obviously the Greeks would be very clear that that is true dialogue, real dialogue, that you find new meaning and new concepts. But I think it is important when people talk that, as Tharp or as rather Deleuze and Guattari make the point, you can reflect on history, you can reflect on mathematics, you can reflect on many things. That doesn't make it philosophy. So I know it's a big question, and they themselves will say there's no one answer, but I do think, and where I will tie that into is you have to go for depth. And this is one of the reasons why it appeals to me. Because what these people all have done for me, they've made me look at what do we actually mean by dialogical teaching or democratic teaching in a classroom, and where are children's voices in real terms, as in their own thoughts, their own making meaning, and their opportunity to share it with other children to make new meaning. So in that sense, how teachers can become Socratic teachers is important to me. Well, in Socratic teacher, and this will go back to Tharp and Gallimore, where they have a whole section on the whole role of questions and what questions are, and questions that control, questions that inquire. But the main point they make in Arousing Minds to Life is, well, not the main point, but in this particular piece, what they talk about is how the role of a question is turned completely in the classroom, and only in the classroom, where those with the knowledge ask questions of those without the knowledge, whereas in fact a question is asked by people who want to inquire and don't know something, and they ask people who have that information about the bus or the aeroplane or whatever. So in that sense, they raise that, I think, very effectively. Now, I'm not removing questions from the classroom, rather asking that children's questions will also have a place. And I think as children go up through either early years or primary education, they ask less questions when really they should be asking more and more and more. Should be a good indication of a good education system is that by the end of it, children are asking many more questions than they came into the system with. Of each other and of their teachers and of their curriculum. So in that sense, that is one of the central themes of certainly a lot of neo-Vygotskians, and that a Socratic teacher, rather than giving the right answer, which we have to in some ways, we have to encourage facts, but within that to keep alive, and rather than closing down questions very quickly with the right answer, to open them up, to encourage inquiry, to encourage wonder and curiosity, because that openness to learning is what will sustain good learners for all of their lives, not just to end and get through their exams or whatever else. But it will also do that for them. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be one or the other. So in that sense, of Socratic teaching is to become like Socrates, not maybe as rigorous as he was with some of his students, but at least to say, okay, well, let's look at this, and to walk with them, to question with them.
What is really interesting to me when I have conversations with colleagues around Aboriginal families, multicultural families, but particularly Aboriginal families, I can almost substitute the word, which I don't like, disadvantaged families, so that I work with, into those conversations. There are specific differences, and I fully understand that. I'm so interested in the notion of what we call marginalised and disadvantaged families, what we understand by learning, which is so often a very white, middle class, mainstream model and understanding of learning. My absolute long-term outcome would be to be able, through the work that I've been doing with families and the learning I've done from families, to be able to get schools particularly to re-understand what is valued in learning, what children bring, what families bring, and that is every bit as valid as the kinds of things that we consider to be really important. So that who a child is, their identity, their understanding, their cultural understanding, and I mean that in the broadest sense, is far more important than if they can write their name, or if their parent remembers to wrap their lunch up in the right way, or send the right kind of food, or remember to do the right kind of thing. And part of that is about educators at all levels, again, moving that centrality away from themselves, that families are not there to support the educator's needs. Educators are there to add to the family, add to the child's life. We're not the child's whole life, neither we should be. We are part of the child's life, and we need to remember that families have a whole lot of other things that are important to them. When I talk to parents about what they want for their children in 20 years' time, and these are disadvantaged, marginalised, low educated families, so I can put them in all those boxes, they never say, I want my child to be rich and famous. They always say, I want my child to be connected to family. I want my child to be happy. I want my child to have the kind of job that gives them satisfaction. I want my child to have relationships with people that really matter. These are the things that really, really matter. Now, they understand that the pathways to some of those things will be formal learning. You know, you're going to get a job that you really love, most likely, if you have a strong formal learning, if you're literate, if you're numerate, if you're all of those kinds of things. But the things that really matter are not things you learn in school. School is one part of children's lives. It's not the be-all and end-all. That's really a critical thing for us as educators to remember. It might be our passion, but it's not everything to everybody.
So, you know, when I'm talking about my worldview, it's located in, you know, my own Indigenous theorising and philosophising. A really kind of key component around Māori worldview is that, you know, it is an interconnected world, that the relationships that we honour are between people, creatures, land, the trees, the environment, water, rivers, that those relationships are fundamental. Let's take out that word fundamental, pivotal to the way that one responds, acts, moves within the world. And I think the key thing is about interconnectedness, that we are connected to all things, and that means to all peoples. So I think that's kind of sits beneath my thinking around philosophy.